Welcome, everyone. This being Wednesday, May 17th, 6 p.m., we will start tonight's Ways and Means Committee meeting. And as we normally do, I'd ask you to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I could ask you to please remain standing for a moment of silence for all of those who have served in the armed forces, home and abroad, and for all of those who have provided the ultimate sacrifice for our liberties. Thank you. Please have a seat. Okay, Clerk Semino, if we could have a roll call, please.
Certainly. Councilor Reynolds?
Here.
Councilor Flaherty?
Here.
Councilor Maglio?
Here.
All present.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have no approval of minutes this evening, nor do we have any old business to conduct. So I will ask for a motion to take off of the table the 23025 Mayor FY 2024 operating budget.
Motion to take off the table order 23025.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, so first up, we'd like to have the school department present their budget. Welcome, Superintendent.
Good evening.
I just want to note that we have a number of school committee members here with us this evening, and thank you for joining us. Okay. Superintendent Lee, do you have any opening statements you'd like to make?
Very briefly, Councilor Reynolds, so the budget before you for us as a school department represents a level services budget. It seeks to maintain the programming, the staffing, and the other sundry pieces that we provide on an annual basis to all of our students. It does so in a climate of increased special education costs, some unknowns in terms of state legislation related to private tuition costs for special education programs, but we believe that it will allow us to maintain our footing where we are and continue to provide the excellent education we provide all the students here in Braintree, and we look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Okay. First up, I'd like to ask Councilor Flaherty if she has any questions or comments.
Thank you, and thank you for coming here today to talk with us about this budget. It's a really big piece of the pie, and so it's important for us to vet it properly. If you'll bear with me, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of math with me, but I'm going to go really slow, and that's for me, not for you.
Both of us.
When I look at the budget, I see that in FY23 we had about $68.5 million, and in FY24 we're at $74.7 million.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do the subtraction all the way out, that looks like we have $6,212,395 total increase, which is 9%, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my main interest right at the moment is to track where that dollar increase is going, and I think I have some notions, but I don't think I have the whole entire picture. And that's why I'm looking for you to flesh it out. What I understand so far is that we have 4 reading teachers at Flaherty, Highlands, Hollis, and Ross, where their salaries were covered through one-time funding last year.
And you're going to see that throughout the budget. As you recall, in the FY23 budget, we made the budget balanced by using $2.2 million in one-time revenue that we had. Again, as you can recall, some of that money was the remainder of the ESSER money that we received from the federal government related to COVID. The other was some circuit breaker savings, circuit breaker being extraordinary expense for special education reimbursement that we get from the state. So using that $2.2 million, we were able to balance the budget last year. In this budget, the town has reabsorbed that $2.2 million. So what you will see throughout the budget are some offsets, which is us putting back into our operating budget the $2.2 million that we had used one-time money for in the previous year.
Right. So that $2.2 million covered these 4 reading teachers, 3 librarians, for math specialists.
Minimally, there are some other pieces as well, but you are, and some other pieces as well, but you're accurate in terms of what you're saying.
Can you fill in what the other pieces are?
To your point, reading at Flaherty, Highlands, Hollis, reading at Ross, library at East, South, Braintree High School, math specialist at Ross, math specialist at Flaherty, math specialist, I'm sorry, I just said that, sorry. There is some of that money that also went to our tuition for special ed programming. And then there's a line in classroom coverage for staff development that allowed us to pay for PD. We bring in people to cover so teachers can attend PD. That's on, I believe that's one of the final pages. That was only $15,000.
Okay.
But those highlights the ones that I'm aware of.
Okay, so 4 reading teachers, 3 librarians. I have 4 math specialists. 1 at Flaherty, 1 at Highlands, 1 at Morrison, and 1 at Ross. Is that wrong?
I'm carrying 3 on my list. I'm sorry. So I have
Okay,
Flaherty,
so
Highlands, and Ross.
Let me just clear this up. Where we have a new person at Flaherty, because there was a 0 in the column for last year. So that's definitely new. And then in the Highlands, we have a 200% increase. And I may have made a mistake in assuming that was a new person.
No, part of it was a partial offset in terms of the salary. We used some of the $2.2 million. We didn't use all of it for that particular position. Again, we balanced the budget last year. Where the ultimate $2.2 million landed was really an accounting function, much more than we had already identified that person.
Okay. Is it fair to say that the specialist at Morrison, where there's a 164% increase, is also partial offset?
I actually believe that is a movement of personnel from a very low experienced person to a very high experienced person.
Okay. Well, that was more complicated than I thought it was going to be.
Sorry.
But that just shows you what I know. Okay,
me too.
So we have some teachers, some librarians, and then when we look at the out-of-district tuition, that is a pretty big couple of lines where we have in-state tuition and collaborative tuition.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the increases between those 2 lines, I find $1.1 million, basically.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So we have those items were covered by the revenue offset last year. And that gets us totally, basically, to the 2.2 that you were talking about. So that makes sense to me. And then where is the rest of the total dollar increase? So $4.2 million. Where is the rest of that increase landing in this budget?
The majority of it would be in contractual increases, if you think in terms of steps and lanes, and the most recently negotiated contract with the BEA. Recall that 86% of our budget is people, and so those increases are significant.
Okay, so just so we're clear, this doesn't include any additional services to our students?
No.
It doesn't include any additional supplies for our students?
No.
No additional extracurriculars for our students?
No,
It just keeps us in place with where we were last year.
correct.
So this 9% increase covers the revenue that we got through ARPA, and then also the contractual increases,
Correct.
and nothing else.
And because it was brought up earlier, the percentage increase is closer to 7.5%. When we were looking at increases earlier in the budget cycle, as you recall, we were still in the midst of negotiations with the union. So in year one, we were not carrying an anticipated increase. So the increase looks larger from year one to year two, which is the budget we're now discussing. So when we go back and put that number in, it's closer to 7.5% increase.
Okay. Okay. The next thing I wanted to ask, when I look at your budget, I noticed that all the lines for utility and fuel are zeroed out. Is that related to the maintenance merger?
It's exactly related to the maintenance merger. Those costs went over to the town, as
Okay.
did the money.
Okay. But in reviewing the police budget, I noticed that there is $25,000 in their budget, which is marked for building repairs and maintenance. And you have 10 buildings where they just have one, but you have zero money. So I asked about that, and the explanation that I got from the police department is that that money is for supplies, and that facilities would then provide labor. Is there a different arrangement for our schools, or, what is the explanation for that discrepancy?
I will not try to explain the police budget. However, we anticipate that the town's facilities department will handle the supplies, labor, and other materials that might be necessary to do any repairs at the schools.
Okay. Because it seems to me that a budget is a self-fulfilling prophecy and a statement of priorities. And one of the things that Braintree is really struggling with, as you well know, is the deferred maintenance, which has been our practice for years. And when we don't budget to make anticipated repairs and to handle the maintenance that we know is needed, it's very easy to just not do it. Like maybe we have the best of intentions, but if we don't budget for it, it gets lost in the shuffle or other priorities take precedence. So that's maybe not an issue for you to resolve, but that's an issue that I see in this budget, because if you took $25,000 and multiplied it by 10, well, that would be a substantial amount of money that would be budgeted for our schools to take care of their buildings. And although the facilities department may have an answer for this, that's an item of concern. Those are my questions for you for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Maglio, questions or comments?
Thank you. Thank you for the information that you've provided to all of us so far, and for the opportunity to have this conversation. I am still having a little bit of confusion around answering questions that I was asked. And so in order to be able to provide this information, I need to ask a couple more questions about revenue. And from my perspective, my world within sort of the nonprofit finance world is that when money comes in, wherever it's from, whatever state department, federal department, local, a grant, whatever it is, that comes in with an intended use, that's just all labeled restricted. So even though it might go into the main bank account or the main fund at the agency, it still has to be paid out to those programs. That's basically what restricted funding is, and the type of funding that I'm familiar with. So when I look at the school budget, what I'm trying to figure out is how much money, whether it comes, forgetting that it comes through the town, I'd like to know how much of the money in your total budget came into Braintree as restricted for Braintree Public Schools. So I know that there's $20.6 million, Chapter 70, approximate, and I know that these are, they have to be tweaked or refined or finalized, but so that's 20.6. And then in the Title 1, 2, 3, 4, that's about $675,000. What are the other funds, the county funds, the mental health funds, the ARPA funds, the tech funds, the earmarks, those other funds that are coming through? Where are those in your budget, and what are those amounts?
Well, as you mentioned, we have several entitlement grants that come in on an annual basis, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. There's also the IDEA grant, which is a special education grant that we get annually. This current year, was $1.5 million that helps offset many of our special education costs. We also have a number of revolving accounts, if you think of athletics as an example, or kindergarten as a different example, where money comes in but goes right back out to fund those programs. In terms of earmarks, some come... Go ahead.
Before you get to the earmarks, what is that total for the revolving accounts?
I do not have that in front of me. I would have to get that to you. I'm sorry, I don't have it.
Okay. Do you maybe have that, Ed? Or do we already have that somewhere? $1.1 all-day kindergarten. Okay.
In the fiscal '24 budget, they requested a limit of 1.1 for the full-day kindergarten. The amount for last year for fiscal '23 was $1,050,000. In addition, for fiscal '24, they've requested an additional revolving account for school transportation for fiscal '24 in the amount of $500,000. Those are the two school revolving funds for this fiscal year.
Okay.
So there'd be no balance in the transportation because we've assumed no fees yet. We're anticipating charging fees for next year. And the $1.1 million for full-day kindergarten pays the salary, so it's 1 year in, 1 year out, meaning that's how we fund those teachers.
Okay. So I'm just doing some quick math here. So that's about 25 million. What else makes up your budget?
Well, as you mentioned, there's money that comes in through a variety of different means, either through the town or directly to the schools, more so through the town. So Chapter 70 is funneled to the schools through the town. The town receives the money and we get an allocation from that as part of their budget.
So that was, I already did count that, the 20.6.
Yep. And so there are other money, so using the ESSER example, during COVID, the schools got the money directly, and we spent it accordingly. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we've spent the last bit covering the $2.2 million from last year. Go ahead.
This year?
In the current year, correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
So that's 2.2.
Yep.
Okay, so that's 27.2.
Yep. Circuit breaker is another one that we get reimbursed by the state for extraordinary special education expenses to a certain percentage. I think right now we're carrying a balance of about $1.5, $1.7 million, but we'll be spending some of that for tuitions as we get closer to the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll anticipate a reimbursement coming for the following year. There are other allocations that we receive that are earmarks, as you mentioned. Some come to the town, regardless of where they're directed, they come through the town. Others can come directly to the school. We don't budget for those because we don't know they're coming, so it would be folly to try to anticipate what might be coming our way. I think most recently, I think you all know that Representative Cusack was able to procure $250,000 for mental health services. We're anxiously awaiting the paperwork on that so we can see how we can spend it. To your point about restrictions, often there are limitations in terms of how we can use those funds.
And my understanding is those funds are not to be supplanted. Those are to be added to whatever other funds are in the budget.
And typically that's related to the language that comes with the grant. And so, whatever it comes our way, even title money, for instance, there are a number of restrictions on it and how we can access it and how we can use it and ways that we cannot. So every allocation, if you will, is slightly different, and we await the paperwork to see exactly what the restrictions are.
Okay, so if we were to include that, that gets us to about 29 million. Okay. And the total school budget amount is?
74,700
And so that
74,732,869 is the budget we're requesting.
So that additional like 44 million, that is coming from what other sources?
I'm sorry, you lost me on that one.
So we did the math for the 29 million.
20 of which is embedded in the $74 million we're requesting.
Right. So if we take the 74 and we subtract the 29,
Mm-hmm.
right, we get about 44 million,
Yep.
45 million. Okay. I can't hear you.
Microphone, thank you. To get to the 74 million, we're including things that are not part of the operating, like circuit breaker is not part of the operating, which is not part of the 74. I think the component you're missing is the tax levy, right? So Chapter 70 is the state portion that funds it. The other piece is just a local contribution, which the town has to provide, which is through your tax levy.
Okay. And so that local contribution is how much?
It's required to be 51.8 per DESI, preliminary calculation.
Okay. That's the number. And where do I find that number in our various revenue
It's
breaks?
not broken down anywhere. It's part of your tax levy. They don't break it out to show the individual component amount provided by the school, because overall the school, just like all your other departments, are part of your general fund. So there's no individual component you will see that says this is school revenue, this is revenue to fund the school. Chapter 70 is buried in your state aid, so that total amount of state aid you see on Mr. Spellman's revenue summary, Chapter 70 is buried in there, but you will not see a specific category under your tax levy that says school required. It's just not how it's presented.
And DESI requires that 51.8 million because why?
I'm certainly not getting to net school spending calculations, but I will say that DESI every year requires a certain minimum, or depending upon who you talk to, maximum, depending upon what community, amount that you have to provide your students and you have to provide for education. So a portion of that is state funded, a portion of that is local funded. And that's really the distinction.
It's all based on a foundation budget that was created many years ago. The DESI or the state would expect that the town of Braintree would spend minimally $72.5 million on its school budget. Braintree actually spends more than that. But they base the Chapter 70 allocation related to those factors.
How do we spend more than 72.5?
The budget in front of you is for $74,732,000.
But that's not all Braintree funds, that's additional funds. So you're saying the total amount for Braintree Public Schools needs to be
above 72.5.
Above 72.5.
The foundation budget that the state designates.
Foundation budget, okay.
And also very important to point out too, the 72 million that we're requesting for fiscal year 24, that's the school committee controlled piece. There are other costs that get factored in. For example, your HR department includes millions worth of dollars worth of education eligible costs on the end of year report as a city and town contribution. So the town of Braintree is well over the minimum net school spending here in this town.
So what I think I'm trying to understand is what is the part that the town can be flexible on adding to that mix? Like, what are the decisions in front of the town in terms of if there's a formula that requires us to spend a certain amount, and that's blended with other funds that are coming through in restricted amounts, then where is that little sweet spot that is up to the discretion of the town to make good on what the needs are of the school?
By increasing revenues or cutting up people's budgets.
Right.
The number. Like, how much of those millions is it that we get to decide that we can put in 1 million or 2 million or 3 million or 12 million or 50 million?
It does relate to the general fund. Like every other department that has sat in the seat before me, the town needs to decide where is it going to spend the assets that it has, the resources that it has. And so I could come and ask for $150 million as a Ways and Means. You'd have to recommend something to the council, and everybody would have to approve of it. You could do it that way, but to Sean's point, you'd have to be taking it from somewhere else, right? So there is a lot of flexibility that the town has, but the town also has a number of different responsibilities that it has to, fulfill. So we come with a budget that we think that the town can support with the resources that the town has. And we obviously advocate strongly for our students and our teachers to try to get the most from the town that we can.
Sure.
But our imagination is not limited by our budget in the sense that we could always come back and say, hey, there are some other programs we'd like to offer. Hey, here's some, smaller class sizes that we'd like to run. But it is a trade-off for the town in terms of where it spends its resources.
Okay. I appreciate that little dive into breaking down that revenue. My second question is actually, interestingly, that you should bring it up, with regard to supplemental budgets. Has Braintree Public Schools ever submitted a supplemental budget request?
Ever? The answer is yes. Often the answer is no. We purposely try not to come back to the town for supplementals. School budgets work a little bit differently than some other budgets. We need to be more malleable than most other places. I could not sit here today and tell you exactly how many students are going to show up in September. I cannot tell you about any family that might move into town that has extraordinary special ed costs associated with them. So we as a district need to be flexible. So that means that we are able to move money within our budget, and we do so frequently so that we don't come back to supplementals. Sometimes that's not possible, and when those situations arise, we would come back.
So like when the roofs came off, one of the Ross School, when the roof came off, would that have been a reason for submitting a supplemental?
That was covered by insurance, so in that particular case, no.
All right.
Let's say if we had a complete failure of a heating system in one of the elementary schools, and to open we needed to do it, we might need to come back here for supplemental, because we would not obviously anticipate something of that magnitude. So insurance does cover a lot, but there are circumstances that would bring us back here, yes.
Okay, and so that would be something extraordinary?
Yes.
Extraordinary, unexpected, or just more needs than were anticipated?
Yeah, and as our budgets get tighter, it is more difficult for us to be as malleable as we'd like to be. So the likelihood of us coming back is increasing, sadly. But we would come back if necessary, but we would also try to manage it as efficiently as we can internally until that moment.
Okay. I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I'm going to ask the Council President if she has some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Superintendent Lee and to our members of the school committee who have joined us this evening, and for all your work before this gets to the council. And I just want to take a minute to remind people that the council's role, the only levers we can pull with the budget are to reduce the budget or approve the budget. So I want to just clarify that, because sometimes the powers of the council, sometimes we wish we had more. But in the case of the budget, we cannot increase anything in any number in any one of our budgets. That power rests solely with the mayor. So with that said, I also want to congratulate the school committee and our teachers union, who I know worked diligently over many, many months to come to an agreement on a contract. And I know as a parent of 2 Braintree Public School students, I am incredibly relieved and grateful that that's come to pass. And what I also want to make sure is that all of our teachers are going to be able to be supported in fiscal year '24. So again, for residents, the fiscal year is not like the calendar year. The fiscal year starts on July 1st, and it goes to June 30th of the next year. So as of July 1st, we're going to have a new budget, and I want to make sure that the 74.7 that we've allocated is sufficient to support the new contract, because I know this number was derived before the contract was settled, and also the Patriot Ledger reported a 9% increase as part of the contractual obligation. I believe that was over a 3-year time period. So I'd just like to understand, is that $74,732,869 account for the newly tentative contract?
We believe it does. The contract, tentative as it is, has, in essence, 1.5 in the first year, 2 in the second year, 3.5 in the third year. There are market adjustments in year 2 of 0.5% and in year 3 of 1.5%. So if you look at an effective increase to salaries in next year's budget, it's approximately 2.5%. We budgeted a number that we think allows us to cover that and continue to maintain all the services and programs that we have right now, which we're excited about. And so, the answer to your question from my perspective is yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I also want to highlight that I know, Superintendent Lee, in your school committee meetings, you had, I guess, what I would call a wish list of possible adds. If we did have extra funding, you have about 8 teachers or 8 positions that you would add if we had the funding. Is that still accurate, the 8?
Those would be accurate. So, in a more budget-friendly season, we would be looking to add some positions. Some people had talked about bringing back exactly what had been reduced several years ago. However, times have changed. So we would bring back different positions, but we would certainly bring back positions or add positions if we were in that position.
Okay. So I'm trying to offer the magnitude of some of the choices that we're facing. So while Superintendent Lee's numbers estimate about $60,000 per position, roughly, the town, rightly so, adds in benefits. So with that value added in, for each additional position that we want to fund, it's about $80,000 to $82,000 per position. So again, to put that into context, to get 8 new teachers is $650,000. And then to bring back some of the cuts that had been made in 2020, 2021, and 2022, for each new position that we want to add, we're looking at another $80,000. So again, I just want to highlight that while this budget, and I appreciate we're working under constraints, and keeps us where we were last year, as Councillor Flaherty pointed out, does not allow us to add anything to our school department, and frankly to really any other department. So with that, for now, that is all the questions I have, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so I have a number of questions. So just to confirm, so the 9.2%, which was quoted by the mayor when he presented us the budget, that isn't actually an accurate number for the increase. From what you said, the 7.5% is a more accurate number of what has been increased, because of the fact that you had to reimburse the one time.
Correct.
Right. So, and that one time $2.2 million came from the circuit breaker and ESRA.
Correct.
Okay. So does this $2.2 million reimburse those two funds?
Yes, in terms of the one-time money we use to balance the current budget, that $2.2 million that is now in this operating budget before you would allow us to pay for the same things that we had, minus a little bit of inflation in the next budget, yes.
Great, so now you're back in the black in those two categories.
Correct.
Okay, great. So again, just to reflect, I think it's important to note that 9.2% is not an accurate number for increasing the school budget. I mean,
No,
we can split hairs.
You can split hairs, and part of it, part of it was the unknown in terms of negotiations. That at this point we'd be able.
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Yeah,
I'm going to get to that.
We'd be in a much
Right.
more accurate position to give you the actual increase.
Okay, so now we look at real numbers again.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've established $2.2 million of this budget is going to reimburse what was taken last year in a one-time fund. So, since you brought up the topic about the contracts, so my understanding is that, in reading the details of what was an agreement and then is pending the full membership endorsing this negotiation result, that we have 4% for all intents and purposes are going to cover for what 23 increases would have been in 23 and in 24. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and 5% of the 9 total that was quoted is going to be increased in the fiscal 25 budget.
Correct.
In terms of salary increases. And I just wanted to note, I'm very happy to see that the teachers are being fairly compensated, and that also the paras was a huge increase, and I appreciate that fact that was taken care of and addressed. So now the school budget itself, and as the council president accurately depicted our abilities, we can't add anything, but I will say for the record that to me a priority in this town is funding our schools. Absolutely a priority. And because it has so many ripple effects on the value of our community and in many different ways, direct and indirect ways. So that makes me happy. But the other half is what I'm very, very uncertain of and cautious of, is our ability to pay. Our revenues, and that's going to be another topic of discussion outside of this tonight's meeting, the projected revenues, I think, are very, very optimistic. Okay? So, that being said, that we live in we had a very lengthy discussion the other night concerning overtime impacts on our budget. And those numbers aren't truly reflected in our budget, per se, the real, actual numbers, because when we do a comparison like this year, we compare to what the proposed numbers of last year's budget submission was, and we compare it to the proposed numbers that are being put in here. And for this subsequent year's budget, it doesn't reflect, in my book, it doesn't reflect accurately on what our costs were in fiscal 23. So what that leads us to is then, now we get into fiscal 24, and with a pretty high level of certainty, we know we're going to have a lot of cost overruns. And in particular, for overtime, for our public safety. It's a huge number that we have to pay every year. So the reason I bring that up, because it illustrates money that's taken away from the real investment needs we have in this community. And it takes away from our ability to have a higher level of confidence that we can pay for everything that's coming up in this budget. So those are a couple of nuanced kind of opinions that I have. Now, that has a ripple effect on how much money we can spend for our schools. Bringing it back to that.
Yep.
Okay? So from a salary perspective, is it true that there is going to be a $10,000 offer for early retirement?
It is.
Okay. So that's additional money. Has that been factored in into the salary lines that we have that are going to back fund 23 and 24?
It's factored in a different way. So if you think of somebody who is on the verge of retirement, typically they've been working in the field for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they're close to maxed out on our salary scale.
Right.
We bring in replacements at a much lower spot
Right.
on that scale. So that 10,000 comes from that break between the high salary going out and the low salary coming in. So in essence, that's self-funding. And over time, because now you're dealing with a lower salary over time, there's overall savings to our operating budget if that is a successful endeavor as far as a retirement incentive is concerned. One, it self-funds. Two, it lowers the operating costs moving forward.
Right. And I think in principle, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Has there been any kind of proof of concept of that done? Have you actually done a paper exercise, a math exercise on that?
Well, we
That
do it
gives
on
you a high level of confidence that that
Yes.
actually is going to happen?
Yes. In fact, we can look at other communities that did something similar. We can see the actual savings that they've realized. We take those savings year over year when people retire regardless.
Mm-hmm.
As we looked at this particular negotiation, I think we got to a place that said a number of people with the right incentive would want to retire. And if that were true, they could leave the field. We'd recognize savings. They'd have a little something extra to take with them. But again, our overall operating costs would be lowered, which is what we need, right?
Right.
Is you talk about revenues, you talk about the town's finances. We have a responsibility to be as efficient as possible and to reduce costs where we can. So, that is part of that overall strategy to try to become more cost conscious moving forward.
So you have, so you're offering the $10,000 to, and the way that you have figured this out is that it will pay for itself. And so if we have 10 employees at a higher salary that decide to take this, you pay out $100,000. You are going to realize, you have a high level of confidence, you are going to realize $100,000 in savings and salaries.
100%.
100%. Okay. And how does that then play out in your factoring for 25, 26? What's the benefit that you see coming back to you as well?
Lowering the salary base. So again, if I have the 5 of you at $100,000 a piece, that's $500,000. If I replace you with people at $60,000 a piece, it's $300,000. So our base goes down by $200,000.
Okay, so yep, we see that. Now in let's just say, let's move ahead to 25.
Yep.
You've had a savings, you've now decreased your salaries by $100,000 based on the example I gave you previously. In 25, now there'll be increases, I'm assuming, for those new teachers. So in comparative numbers to your let's say your 23 costs, you're going to have a lower salary cost. I mean, well, somewhat, with a level.
And slowly it's going to go up again.
It's going to go back up again, and that's the real world.
Yep.
I understand that, absolutely. So, thank you. I just thought that was helpful for the public to hear that as well,
absolutely.
from an explanation standpoint. So thank you for bearing with me on that.
No problem.
Okay, so I'm going to just pivot for a moment to the finance director on this one. So, is it also going to be now? We hear this thing called a Me Too, I guess, from a contractual standpoint for our police, our fire, our ASME, our Teamsters contracts that are also being negotiated this year. Do they have the ability to come back to you, to the town, and say, hey, we want that level increase, same level of increase as what the teachers got, as well as the $10,000 buyout option?
I believe within the contract, the language talks about the cost of living adjustment. So in the case of 1.5% for fiscal '23, if a union had agreed to a 1% increase, they would be eligible for that additional 0.5% increase from 1 to 1.5 to make them whole for fiscal '23.
But just from a straightforward answer, do the other unions have the ability now to come back and renegotiate or demand the same increase that the teachers received? Contractually speaking. And if you don't have the answer this evening, we can find out, you can get back to me on that, but I think that's an important answer for us to understand.
In the case of the $10,000 that you were talking about, I don't believe there's any language within the other contracts that have that
That they'd become...
provision that would be eligible.
Okay, so that's so right now, you're thinking that $10,000 component, early retirement component, would not be eligible for any kind of and excuse me for the term, any kind of a Me Too type of invoke. To invoke that Me Too clause.
I'll check with the HR director in the morning and get back to you. I don't want to give you an incorrect answer,
Okay.
but that's my understanding of the contracts.
Okay, so the reason I ask these questions is I'm not against this increase or for these conditions that was agreed upon in the teachers' contract negotiations. I want to understand the implications potentially across the board for the town for additional salary increases that we didn't anticipate.
Again, Superintendent Lee can correct my understanding. The $10,000 I don't believe was
The school department's
negotiated in the contract.
understanding is the Me Too clauses relate to COLA increases and not market adjustments or early retirement incentives.
Okay, so if we could get a clarity on that, that would be greatly appreciated, Director Spellman. So thank you. Yep, okay. So we answered the 2% increase. We talked about the salary impacts. So on the salary impacts, and this again, maybe Superintendent, you can answer this. So we know we have a set aside in the budget in 23 for increases, for negotiations and contract increases. We didn't have that increase during this year, and as a normal practice, the town held money aside in an HR account to cover those increases for all of the contractual negotiations that were going on. So that dollar amount that you have in that account set aside to address all the increases, do you have enough in that account to cover all of the increases that have been agreed upon already and for this increase? Or would you be requiring another influx of cash into that account in order to make whole all of these new increases?
The original estimate we made a year and a half ago when we set up the salary reserve, we had set aside approximately 1% of the projected salaries.
Okay, so it was a 1%, you factored in 1% increase, but now we're looking at potentially, 4%, so I'll divide that in half. 2% increase for the fiscal 23 year.
For
Fiscal 23.
For fiscal 23, the supplemental budget that you have request is funding an additional 0.5% to bring everyone up to the 1.5% for fiscal year 23.
Okay, and you're speaking about supplemental number 2.
Yes.
Okay. I have not had an opportunity to see that yet. Okay. And okay. All right. So that's another question for later. Again, what that lends, and the first reaction I have in my mind, where is all this money coming from? Because I'm very concerned. I want, as I said on the record, I want to see our teachers fairly compensated. I want to see all our employees fairly compensated. But our ability to actually make that payment in this budget, this is where I start to question our revenues. Do we have enough? Or even free cash that we're using quite a bit. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have a good handle on what our actual free cash number is or what it will be as a result when the dust settles for this budget year and the supplementals. So that remains to be seen. But that is a concern of mine. Because from that perspective, we introduce a tremendous amount of risk to this town's operating abilities when we've already seen a decrease in our bond rating because of the fact of available cash. We have a negative outlook. I don't know what the actual free cash position was when that was based on the assessments of the bond rating agencies. Will we, depending on what that free cash number is going to be, along with what the numbers of our reserves are, and stabilization funds, which was already at an all-time low. So I'm just a bit concerned, and that's in the back of my mind when I start thinking, not just about this year, but thinking about next year as well. And I think that's a prudent thing to do, is for us to be able, operationally speaking, to look over the horizon and say, is this sustainable, or are we just living paycheck to paycheck kind of a thing, all right? The way that we have to pay for our operations here in the town of Braintree in this current day. So those are just concerns I have, and the risk element to all of that is I think, a very important understanding for us all to have. That when we walk out of here and there's an approved budget, whatever that budget will be, that's not the end of our worries. It's just kind of giving us, all right, we're okay right now, but we'll see what next week brings. Because we're already teetering on a very thin margin of error to begin with very little reserve funds or rainy day funds to help us out for the unexpected. So I'll now pivot back to the topic at hand. It was a very important, from my perspective, to understand the connections of all of our budgets by department, and in particular, it's very important when we talk about the school budget because of its overall importance to the health of our community, to our ability to educate the future of our country, these children. And so now what I'll do, okay, so in this budget, let me just ask this question again on the salaries. So in this budget, does it represent an increase? Is it in the numbers? I'm looking at the salaries, the salary line itself.
So the increase for FY24 is in our budget.
And what was that increase percentage?
Well, at this point, it's 2.5% for
So
today.
with the number you presented to us that was approved by the school committee,
Yep.
you factored in
Yes.
an increase. And do you know what that dollar amount actually is going to be? I mean, you can come back to me on that.
I'll have to come back to you.
Right. These are important. The reason we ask these questions is really important for us to know what
Yeah.
all the numbers are. So that,
It's approximately 1.7 million.
okay. And the 2% represents 1.7 million?
Plus the market adjustment of 0.5. 2%
Yeah.
represents about 1.25 million. So another 0.5% on top of that.
So for the 24 budget.
The budget that is in front of you right now, yes.
Okay. And then just back to the finance chief again. To pay off and make whole our fiscal 23 budget, that's where supplemental 2 comes in.
That's correct. The additional 0.5% will be in
Okay.
supplemental too.
Thank you. Thank you. Will that then change the overall percentage of your increases that were advertised for your
No, we
overall budget?
factored that in ahead of time. As we created the budget, we were in a place where we were comfortable making assumptions about what that increase would ultimately be, so we compounded it so we have the number correct.
Okay. Great. Thank you. I appreciate you bearing with me on that.
Yep.
Okay. Now back to tab K. All right. So just some questions for clarification purposes. I have page 1, and this is in the athletic department. Athletics reconditioning. What exactly is that?
Helmets, shoulder pads, think of anything that has an impact to it. Those
Okay.
things have to be refurbished to make sure that they're safe for students to use.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. And in terms of the future of Manaticus School, what is the vision of that?
The conversations that I have been associated with related to that would be to lease it out to another educational entity.
So, with the opening of South Middle, and is that on track, by the way, for
The new South
September?
Middle, the new South Middle School is on track.
All right, so we look like we're going to be having students in that building come September.
We anticipate everybody being there in September.
Great, great. And that's going to free up space, as we all know, in the elementary schools.
Liberty and Highlands, yep.
And I know that there was a very spirited public debate and questions about the redistricting.
Spirited.
Very spirited. And that there actually wasn't any, let's just say, actionable items that came out that said that they're going to do A, B, C.
At this point, no. The
Okay.
idea of redistricting was tabled. It is something that is still on the table, if you will, as
Yeah.
we look forward to FY '25. It may reemerge as a topic we need to analyze more.
And you see that as an opportunity, I'm assuming, for potential cost savings for your operating budget.
Correct.
Right. More efficiencies is the way I see it. And there's some reservations, let's just say, by certain number of residents about the benefit versus, let's just say, the change impact.
It's a delicate topic, to be
Yes.
fair, not only in this town, but in any other community I've been in. However, to your point about efficiencies and cost savings, it needs to be explored.
Right, and I would agree with that. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for indulging me there on the inadequate school question and the subsequent questions on redistricting. Next I have is on page 3, nurses. So it looks like you've had a decrease of 6.9. Is there a different kind of a coverage approach that you're taking now from nurses?
Not currently. Usually a percentage that small really relates to the individual in the position and their
Okay.
experience in the pay.
All right, so thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that for me. Next would be the high school administration and security expenses and materials. How does that coincide with the presentation you gave us a few weeks back on the money allocated for overall school securities? I see here that, you're level funding that. And is that with a premise, that number or security-related expenses across the school, does that reflect that plan being implemented? And augmenting?
No, those numbers would not be in our operating budget. As you know, we are
Not being in the operating budget, but the impacts of using that money for the security purposes. Does it have the indirect impact of lowering your expenses in the budget for the security?
No, well, obviously a lot of the security is our actual security staff that are assigned to the high school. The expenses typically are software that relate to some security elements that we run in the background of things. The proposals that you've seen related to the $1 million debt exclusion vote and the Department of Justice grant that we received are really about securing the infrastructure of what we do. And so, again, are not reflected here because it does not require additional personnel at this point in time.
Right.
And everything that we are looking at will be turnkey once it's implemented, so that we would not need to buy additional things to implement it and operate it.
Thanks for that clarification. Okay. So also in that section, you have SAL security personnel, a decrease. I don't know, it looks like it's about...
It's a retirement, and somebody hired at a lower rate.
Thank you. Okay. All right. And next on my questions are for middle school administration on page 3 at the bottom, memberships. What exactly is that?
Our middle schools and our high schools belong to several organizations. It can be something like NEASC is the accrediting body. All our schools are part of that. AFCD is a professional development organization. Most of our principals are members of that. There's also MSSAA, which is another professional organization that secondary administrators can belong to. Things of that nature.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on down the line on page 4, we have science department. We have South has a decrease of 16.2%.
Again, it's personnel.
Personnel?
Right. So it's somebody who left. This goes back to the conversation about how you fund the early retirement. This is a situation where somebody at the top of the scale retired. We hired a person at the lower end of the pay scale, and it just reflects the difference in their pay.
And that number is reflected in a more detailed level in I think it's tab M, salaries.
I believe you have the whole book, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have the same binder you do.
Well, all right, so, no, you have the one tab that says positions. It lists every position by school, program number, et cetera.
Yep.
Okay? 3025. Okay, I can go back and look at that. And then there looks like some instructional software. Was that because it was paid off, or is that just a discontinuance?
No, we consolidated it all into a technology line item. If you go through each department, you'll see the technology lines have been zeroed out, and the technology software was compiled under the technology department.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back and take a look at that. Okay. And supplies, is that another approach? It looks like you're down 3% on science supplies?
That would just be based on need. Most of the supplies and materials and textbooks are really organized at the beginning of every single year by all the directors meeting in terms of what their needs for a given year might be. If you think of a specific initiative or a textbook or a project you want to do that might increase your cost in a given year, another department might not have that need. That money just moves to the department that has the need, and then we'll do it again the following year. So that money moves between departments to make sure that they have what they need in a given year.
Okay, so it's really driven by a rotating curriculum, if you will?
Rotating priorities among the departments. So it's not a rotating curriculum, but in a given year...
You're saying something about projects?
Right, so I'm going to use a dumb example because it's the one I like the most. So, at the elementary level, they do caterpillars every year, right? So maybe they want to expand it to another grade, so it costs more money to do that. So they need more money in the supply line. At the same time, social studies, which just did a really big project that requires them to go to a museum, isn't going to do it in the following year, so that money moves from social studies to science to cover the cost that science now needs. So it moves among departments. It's not a rotating curriculum. It's really a rotation of where's the priority in a given moment.
You're sharing.
Sharing is caring.
Everybody gets in line and gets a turn.
That's right.
Okay. And is that something that was more broadly utilized as a program when you, let's just say, let's go back to pre-COVID?
We've been doing it for 6 or 7 years this way, where we start the year, we budget a set amount for supplies and materials for all the departments, and again, they meet and go through what are their priorities in a given year, do the resources match the need, moving money where it might need to go. An obvious example is textbooks. You don't buy textbooks on an annual basis. Maybe English in 1 year is going to get a textbook. Once they bought it, they have it. They don't need that money anymore. It might move over to social studies that now has a book they want to use. So it's been something we've done pre-COVID because we find it to be the most efficient way to utilize the resource.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that detailed answer. So this leads me to the curiosity about Braintree has a STEM program?
We have STEM programming. We do not have, and we continue to try to develop a better STEM overall program, but yes.
So you see that as a definite benefit to your overall programming, and to me, that is a very critical educational need in preparing our future, where we're becoming much more technology driven between math and science, and the country and our economies to remain, again, looking over the horizon, which we all have to do as leaders. I'm a big proponent. I guess I'm using the opportunity to say that I'm a big proponent of STEM.
We would not disagree with you, and we continue to develop the program that we have and expand it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, I need to digest some of this.
Sure.
So I'm going to ask my fellow councilors is there another round of questioning at this time? Madam President.
Chairman, if I may suggest to your earlier points about making sure the Ways and Means Committee, the council, and by extension our community understands the longer-term impact. I believe our town auditor has a 10-year or 5-year model that I'm hoping he can assist us plugging in any of those numbers that you had mentioned. But the point is, I think we can get at that information at a future time
Yes, we
with the
can.
help of our town auditor.
Okay, and that's revenue-based, your study, your review. And at this point, I'm inclined to have a call back next week on revenue and finance. So,
As long as it's Monday, I'll be here.
okay, well, I think that's what we tentatively scheduled was Monday.
Monday it is.
Great, thank you. So, is that all you had,
Yep.
Madam President?
Yep.
Counselor Maglio.
Thank you. So I sent a question through earlier today. This is about the Me Too contract clause. And so just some of the things that were said tonight, I want to make sure that those are part of the answer. So if other unions have a clause that their FY23 might go up 0.5%, I also want to know for FY24, do they go up 2.5, and for FY25, do they go up whatever that last percentage was for the teachers? So I'm looking for who that applies to, who gets it, who doesn't, and is it for the full 3 years? I know it's the COLA, and it's what was agreed upon, but this Me Too clause was explained to me last year and again this year, and I just need to be more clear.
I can only speak for the school department. It is our understanding that Me Too clauses relate to COLA. The COLA increases for the teacher's contract are 1.5 to 3.5.
1.5 to 3.5.
Correct. The market adjustment is 0.5 in year 2 and 1.5 in year 3.
Okay. And so,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so it would be the school department's understanding that other unions in town that have Me Too clauses would be eligible for the 3 years of 1.5 to 3.5. But I'm speaking from the school department's perspective.
okay, that they would be entitled to those COLA. And so is that the case?
Again, that's my understanding. I'll confirm it with the HR department. And within the salary reserve in the finance division, we did set aside or project a 2% salary increase that's within the finance budget in the salary reserve for fiscal year '24.
Okay. And so the question that I'm also interested in is which unions? You don't have to answer that now. I just want to make sure that's part of...
The information that I had asked the director to come back with us.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Council Flaherty, anything further at this moment?
No, not from me, thank you.
Okay. I think that there are other factors in our budget review process that may have an impact on some questions, follow-up questions. My ideal way to handle that would be through email correspondence that we can document and bring to the table when, as far as our deliberations for recommending approval or not on this budget. That being said, I want to just be, in the event that it's a bit more complicated or there's a number of questions that would be better handled in person, I'm going to recommend that, I'm not asking the school department to come back for a callback next week, but I would like to be able to put you on our agenda in the event it happens. So you will see, and this is more of a coordination and a planning move, that we would put them on for our callback, but we may not more than likely be calling them back, just in the event that we would, and you would get prior notice of that.
Okay.
Okay?
Is there a date for that already? Or?
We're looking at the 22nd,
School committee.
Monday evening.
We have school committee that evening, sir?
You do?
We do.
All right. Well, See, part of, I'm kind of torn on this a little bit, because we have as a council and as a Ways and Means Committee, obviously, I would hope that people see this is a very thorough committee. The questions we ask, we try to connect all aspects of it. It's not, we take this very seriously for us to be able to try to best understand all of the impacts so that we can make the best decision that we can in our recommendation to the full council.
Certainly.
So we have a very limited amount of time to do it. This is our, what number meeting is this for us now? On seventh, right. There are numerous departments and aspects of the budget that we have to cover. But we do not want to be able to miss something that we feel would be relevant and significant as a question as we're sitting in front of the full council to try to make a vote, a decision. Our intention is not to drag this out. Our intention is to seek an understanding that we have a full grasp. And as I'll refer to Madam President's comments previously, referring to my comments, is that I think it really is important for us to understand the impacts of decisions we're making today, right, and where they're going in light of a very precarious financial position the overall town is in presently. So that's why I want to be able to have that option. Is Clerk Semino, do you have some input?
Agenda, we actually have the supplemental as well as one other item.
Okay.
So depending on how long those take, we could do the budget after.
We could do, well, see that introduced another level of complexity for us in thoroughness, in that here we are trying to support, we're trying to review and give a recommendation on fiscal 24 budget when we still have a moving target for fiscal 23. Yes, Madam President.
If I might make a suggestion respectfully, what if we try to get our questions answered by email, because, and thanks to the Chief of Staff, those have been flipped pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe the three of us can look at the upcoming week and see what other meetings we have if we do need the school committee to call the school department to come back. I think we just need a 48-hour lead
Correct.
time for public notice.
Right.
But if we can reconcile it via email, that might assist.
I'm hoping that we can.
Yeah.
But in the
so
event we don't.
If I might make the recommendation to start with that, and then we can regroup even tomorrow to see if we need
Right.
to look at the calendar.
Right. And I know we have, and I'm not saying this to scare people, but we have the month of June available to us. We have to have this budget approved before the new fiscal year starts. And traditionally speaking, we've always seemed to have this budget done in May. So we have flexibility. So I would go with your suggestion, Madam President. But again, I just like to level contingencies and expectations of contingencies.
I'd be happy to make myself available.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Superintendent Lee. Okay. Thank you. We appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next up is facilities, and we will be talking specifically on facilities. Where are we?
Check my notes, man.
I'm looking for facilities. Welcome.
Well,
It's always good to see your face.
Yours as well.
All right. Both of you. How you this is your first budget review? Were you here last year?
I was here last year, yes.
Okay, sorry, yeah. See that? You're doing a good job. We don't know you're here.
I like to sit in the back in the shadows.
Yeah, you're the guy that everyone looks to for the assurance, right? That's good. All right. So we've asked you back this evening. I know we had a long session the other night about the DPW. We talked about facilities, but there is a very significant part of your budget that we didn't get a chance to get to, and that is your. Pardon me. So we talked about your budget for addressing the schools, right?
Yes.
So what I'd like, Mike, or Mr. McGurty, if you have, would you like to start off with any kind of a statement of any type or set any kind of parameters?
Sure, certainly. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. We had some handouts, I believe.
Right.
Okay, great. That was what we had just touched on with the school committee on what we had accomplished in the short period of time that we have come together. We have done some very large projects for the school. We have coordinated and pulled together two separate facilities departments on the maintenance side and combined them into one. They are a very effective force. We have some great employees on our side, and they show up every morning and give us 100%. They are enthusiastic and professional, and it is my pleasure and privilege to work alongside these people. And what they have done for this town, a lot of people don't see the work. A lot of the work we do is underground, behind the scenes, in the boiler rooms, in your attics. And we haven't got to the let's make it look pretty phase yet. We're in the keep it running, and they deserve all the credit belongs to them. And again, I am honored to have that group of people and work with them. So I would turn the questioning back to you, sir.
Thank you. Well said. I, for one, would agree with the level of dedication of service and focus that your team provides under excellent leadership.
Well.
All right. So I'm going to ask first Councilor Flaherty if she has any opening questions or comments.
Thank you. So I've been looking through this booklet that you distributed to everybody concerning the Facilities Department school merger, and it's very interesting to me. You've really tackled some very extensive repairs and replacements, things that have been lingering as a need clearly for a long, long time. And so I'm glad that we were able to tackle that work. I'm glad we finally have a system that has enough people in it to tackle the work that's needed in the 10 schools that our school department is made up of. I do want to try to understand your booklet a little bit better.
Okay.
So, do you have a copy up there?
I do have a copy. We also have one right here online.
And I regret for anybody who may be watching this that there isn't a way for us to share this with you digitally for you to be able to see it, but we will make it available online if it's not already. Is this available for residents online?
We can make it available.
Okay, that would be great, and maybe we can put it on the town council site too.
Sure.
Okay, so when I look at the information, it's clear now we have an additional 15 town personnel, so that's great. And we have about half of those are custodial labor, and then, in terms of our costs, half of our costs go to custodial, and then there's maintenance and repairs, and then utilities and fuel, which is probably a cost that fluctuates depending on the cost of gas. Right?
Correct.
Okay. So then we have a series of graphs that show on the next page, and they're not numbered, so it looks like this, where we have a FY21 bar and 22 and 23. And so I'm trying to understand this one. the school facilities budget turned over to you in 23 or 22?
It would have been 23. We're working on 24.
So FY 23?
Correct.
Okay.
We didn't have any input to that budget. We
Yeah.
received it, so yes.
Okay. So the numbers then for FY 22 and FY 21 reflect what you find in the school budget then? Yeah? Okay. And it had been dropping. Have you ever done a look back further to see where it was in years past and corrected it for inflation?
So the numbers in Unis, our accounting system, go back to, I believe, FY 19, and I do have a spreadsheet going back that far. I just didn't represent it on the
Yeah.
graph.
Well, I mean, I looked at the boiler, right? It looks like Cordyceps attacked it, okay? And that didn't happen since 2019. That's been happening for a long time. So I guess it would inform the conversation some to understand the extent to which these problems were able to be tackled in the past, but it's not critical to this conversation tonight. And then it went down another 2% after you guys got a hold of it. Is that because you believed that you could tackle it for less?
Well, we believe we can control it better. There will be a supplemental. That will be supplemental 2, where we have asbestos abatement, and we also have building maintenance costs. Because what we run into as we repair these buildings, we could hit a number of replacements for mechanical equipment, for instance, that would eat up the whole entire budget. We could be looking at the high school rooftop units alone. We could be looking at, if we were to replace them all, maybe $3 to $5 million worth of work. Obviously, we're not prepared to do that, nor do we have to. But to prepare a budget is difficult, so we have to find a base point to work with, and that's why there will be that second supplemental, which will give us that ability to tackle those costs that we cannot really, at this point in a budget, give you an accurate number to its cost.
Okay, well, I'm well familiar with supplementals, and I can certainly understand how the condition of our school buildings would necessitate a supplemental. Perhaps Director Spellman can answer this. Is this the only supplemental pertaining to school needs that we'll get this year before we finish FY 23?
The last supplemental number 2.
Okay. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again more specifically about that supplemental in meetings to come. But for now, what I wanted to think about was you have in your you have a total work orders by school, and then each bar represents the number of work orders for each school, with the total number of work orders being 424. Looks like this. So Mike, what I'm curious on is there a similar chart that can be produced that shows the cost of each school building, the cost of those work orders? Because certainly not every work order is equal in cost.
No, that is absolutely correct. We could potentially we could estimate, or we could get a accurate cost on materials. The labor cost we'd have to run. Obviously, it's an in-house labor cost. We could break that down, but we could definitely get a fairly accurate cost on the material cost for these different buildings and all these work orders that we did.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's a little difficult because some of these work orders might represent a clogged toilet. It might represent a leaking faucet, which isn't necessarily a huge cost associated with that. So anytime something goes wrong with the school, they'll log a work order. Maybe a light bulb is out or a window isn't working properly. So it isn't necessarily the cost, it's the time of the people going to these events to fix the things that are going wrong.
It's not the cost of the light bulb, it's the cost of deploying the person to go and change
Sure.
it. And bringing the ladder and whatever.
Correct.
Yeah, sure. So I guess what I would be interested in knowing is the extent to which, the comparative extent to which each building is putting demands on us on your time and also finances.
Certainly.
That would be very informative.
Certainly. I could tell you right off the top of my head that East Junior High has absorbed a fair share of the costs of the repair work. The high school obviously has the greatest amount of expenditures where we just did the hot water service, and that's where obviously our biggest costs are at this point. But East Junior High, for a school that is new as it is one of our problems that we're tackling on a daily basis, and we're trying to work out a number of issues that have been ongoing since the completion of that project.
Well, that's troubling to hear.
It is, but it's the truth.
Is it because of the technology that's employed there?
Well, partially it was, and then due to the pandemic and the time in which the project was constructed and the oversight, so we have a number of issues. We use some new technologies on the heating, cooling, just so that we could adapt it to the existing building, and we're having a difficult problem with that equipment on a daily basis. But we are getting a better understanding. It's sad to say it's taken us this long, but to gather all the information, to actually be on site, to monitor it, and to understand and get the proper people involved, that it has taken the amount of time that it has. We do anticipate now that we have the manufacturer's representatives involved, as well as Hill International, which was the OPM for the project, that we can now at least start moving forward and hopefully come up with a game plan so that we're not saddled with these repairs year in and year out with no end in sight. So we have taken some positive initiatives, and we have grabbed this tiger by the tail, and we're going to pull it in. We're going to find out where our major problem is, and we're going to correct it. But it will take us some time, but we are now getting people's attention because they know that we understand what the problem is, and we expect to come up with some corrective actions from all those parties that were involved.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that we're experiencing those problems, but I'm glad to know that they are being tackled, although that wasn't supposed to be the building you were focusing all of your time and attention on. Not that you're doing all of your time
That is correct.
there. But once you move away from East, now you're left with a battery of buildings that are all much, much older.
Yes.
Where are the expenses, if you were going to rank them unofficially, how would you rank them?
Well, I would say that you're looking at the older schools are going to be our bigger problems, which would be the Hollis Elementary School as well as the Highlands being our oldest schools.
Okay. So if you could produce kind of a graph that would show me relative cost, or a pie chart, however your software works best, but something that would give me a sense of the comparative financial requirements of each building, that would be enormously helpful. And then similarly, when you look at the next page and it's total work orders by category, and we have paint and electrical and plumbing and HVAC and carpentry and so on, I don't really know. I can see that we haven't had very many painting requirements and many carpentry requirements, but I don't know the relative costs of those things. And I mean, if you're painting a door, that's one thing, and if you're painting a whole building, that's a whole other thing. But each item would be one. So if you were going to look at the cost of those things, where are our costs bundled mostly?
Right now, our costs are bundled in the plumbing, HVAC, and electrical categories. It's our HVAC, which is the most expensive due to the fact that the equipment we're dealing with is in many cases antiquated. It lacks parts. We have the technology to keep it operational, but we have to really start looking to the future to replace it. For instance, we have a rooftop unit on the high school. It is the system that is used to cool the auditorium. It has some serious issues. We will have some answers tomorrow whether or not we proceed repairing it or we look to completely replace it. And that would also be an issue, and we'd be looking for funding potentially through the second supplemental for building repairs that would be presented. It's items like that that we can't anticipate. So I would say that our biggest problem is with our heating and cooling equipment.
So when you talk about making HVAC repairs or improvements, you're mentioning air conditioning, and I know that some of the elementary schools have window units, and it looks like you installed some window units into Highlands. Is there a process that either you or the school committee engages in to determine equity for these kinds of repairs or improvements?
At this point, what you're referring to is the window air conditioners, which when we came on board, they were already been purchased by the Highland School PTO, I believe, and we were just asked to install them. We don't decide which school, which district in the town gets air conditioners and which doesn't. Obviously, as we do with all the projects, we spread them out as equitably as possible, especially as we go forward this summer with the asbestos abatement projects. We have two good-sized projects to upgrade the flooring at the Highland School and the Hollis. And based on what we have for bids that we received, we anticipate those projects to go this summer. And we'll work those, and when it comes to asbestos abatement, we deal with the worst problems first, obviously.
Mm-hmm. How did you decide on which floors to attack first?
Based on the floors, I did a walkthrough of the buildings, and the ones that jumped out at me as to be in the worst condition were the ones at the Highland School, which is the corridors, the tiles are popping up. Somebody prior to us coming on board did some patch and repair work in there, and it's a sad situation. It's a raised patch on a floor, and to keep it from being a tripping hazard, they spray painted it bright orange. So I think that was one of the number one reasons we decided that was a priority fix. We're having issues with the floor tiles coming loose in that building, so we'll address that all at once. If we go down to the Hollis School, the entryway has been patched. There's probably a dozen different floor tiles and colors that are mixed and matched, and they're having the same issues. We put it out for bid. We received some fairly reasonable costs to do the abatement. The flooring at this time, when we finish it, will be an epoxy floor finish. It will not be a floor tile. It'll be an epoxy. It will be clean. It'll look neat. It'll be much better than what we have now. And as we can contract more funds, we would look to put in maybe a waterproof locking floor similar to the high school cafeteria. And we would look to do a project like that, obviously, in-house to save money. The projects that were selected this year and the prices that were received with the work that we will in-house do in participating with these projects will save the town about $250,000 to $275,000. Those are anticipated hard costs that we can back up with estimates. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and hopefully we'll keep going in that direction.
Okay. One of the things that I mentioned to Dr. Lee was that the schools don't have any money in their budget for building repairs. But I know in your budget, in the DPW budget, there is $100,000 marked for school building repairs and no money marked for school repair. I mean, I'm sure that those are just, it doesn't matter. The point is you have $100,000 for school repair.
Yes.
And you have, so I guess what I'm trying to understand is, how does the facilities department work in tandem with any given department to identify who's going to pay for what? Because in discussing with the police department, they have $25,000 in their budget, and their understanding appears to be that they pay for materials and you provide the labor. So the fire department has $5,000, Elder Affairs has $3,000, the library has nothing, and Town Hall has $25,469, and then the school building repairs cumulatively are $100,000. But the schools have no money to give to the facilities for materials. Like, how is all of this working?
Sure. The schools give us work orders. We don't give them a bill. We send personnel up there and we fix it. And that falls in that category of the $100,000 that you pointed out. As far as the police department, they have always carried their own minimal repair budget. It wasn't my purview, nor was it my choice to lay it out that way, but if we do a project for the police department that they request, we've done the gymnasium that they have over, we've done the call room over upstairs. Any of those items that we do, the expensive part of the cost will be paid for by the police department. We would submit to them the costs, for instance, the entryway that we had to repair that was leaking, we had to have it moved. There was a $20,000 cost to that. They had it within their budget, we did not at the time. So we gave them the $20,000 bill and they paid it. If it was in our budget, obviously we would have just paid it from our budget. The fire department has had in the past a larger sum of money with their budget with regards to building repairs. And it was the same situation. We have the talent and we have the staff. We would do the work and they would reimburse us for the materials that we would use. As it stands right now, the fire department has cut that back to roughly $5,000. That won't cover the amount of work that we have to do in those buildings, and we'll have to incur that cost within our own budget.
What if the schools exceed $100,000 in their needs? What if they give you work orders and you reach a point in fiscal years don't align with school years, so that's very confusing for me to try and address. But you reach a point before the school year is over and the fiscal year is turned over where they're asking for more and you don't have it in the budget. Then what do you do? Do you uncover other areas in unspent funding in other pockets of your budget? Does it depend on the size of the request?
It would depend on the size of the request. And again, there's a potential for bonding. I believe I would defer that to Ed with regards to additional spending with regards to school projects.
Okay. What if they needed something that was $5,000?
We would address it. We would take care of that within the budget.
So you would find that out of unspent funding?
That's correct. We would take it out of building repairs.
If I could make one point. We had a large repair at the high school for the hot water heater, and we had to go ask for a supplemental to pay for that. So if something large did come about, and we could not cover it in our budget, we would have to come before council and ask for that money. And one other point, you're correct in saying that we're asking for $100,000 in building repairs. We're also asking for $50,000 in plumbing supplies and $150,000 in HVAC supplies. So there's a number of different categories. It's not just building repairs. So it's plumbing, HVAC, electrical, and so forth.
Okay, so I was thinking about it differently. I was thinking about plumbing supplies as being supplies and repairs being like the time spent per person on doing it.
So if we deploy our town plumber, his salary goes into the facility's salary line. If he has to buy a bunch of valves or other plumbing supplies to fix that problem, it would go into that plumbing supplies account.
Okay. So if the plumber goes to a building, a town building, and requires supplies, that comes out of the plumbing supplies budget. but the plumber's time comes out of the building repairs budget?
He gets paid for 35 hours a week, so he would go to that building to make that repair. Not that line item for plumbing supplies. It's the labor, custodians, and mechanics salaries line.
What then does come out of building repairs?
The question is, what is in building repairs?
What does that cover? 'Cause
That covers every aspect of any repair we do in those buildings, other than labor. The labor comes out of the operational budget. Our employees, we have them in the budget as we submitted, and that's our operational budget. We don't charge for their labor for each individual building or each project that we do. We have an overtime budget. That's the only place that we would take monies out of if we had to do a job that required us to work overtime. We would take that additional monies out to pay for the overtime.
Okay, so then building repair covers every single thing that's not specifically identified otherwise?
As labor, that is correct. Right. That covers, that could be
a door or a window, something
right.
to that effect.
Right. Yeah.
If it's a plumbing valve, we would probably tote it to the plumbing supplies account.
Yeah.
Obviously, if we ran short and expended the plumbing supply fixturing that we were purchasing, we may have to use some of the building supply money to purchase some of the, maybe we have to change some sinks and faucets and valves, and if we exhaust the plumbing budget, we would use it on building supplies.
Okay, so when I think about the air conditioners that you installed for Highlands,
yes,
you didn't buy those air conditioners, but you installed them.
that is
you mentioned that the schools give you work orders.
yes.
Who issues the work order?
The work orders can be issued from anyone that has access to the system. That could be from the principal. It could come from the custodians. It could come from the administration. We get them and they come into the central system, and then we get them in the morning and we look at the ones that we can actually do and complete that day, and we'll assign individuals to those projects, whether that be the carpenter, the painter, the electricians, or obviously the plumber and the carpenter.
Okay, when you get multiple work orders on any given day, how do you prioritize them?
Obviously, it's the ones that are the most important, the ones that may be a hazard. Obviously, leaks take a priority. Electrical issues take a priority. Anything that might be a hazardous to anybody, a child in the school. It could be a broken handrail, it could be a broken door that's not closing properly. And we take care of those immediately. Those are the ones that we go to first thing in the morning.
Okay. You've given me a lot of information, and I maybe have come to the end of my questions. I have to process everything you told me, but I think my other counselors on the committee have questions too, so I will let them go ahead with that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Maglio.
Thank you. So I have questions. I want to go back to something we talked about, I think at one of those Ways and Means Committee meetings when we talked about the supplemental. And I had asked you about, and it has been asked at other meetings too, about an assessment in terms of every building and what every facility needs and what the plan might be for that. And my understanding is that you've explained that right now you're sort of triaging. You're taking care of the worst situations, the biggest emergencies, etc. And so my question then is, how do you achieve equity and also address emergencies?
Equity, okay. Well, let me try to answer it this way. We are going to be doing assessments on our mechanical systems. We are in the process now of putting out to bid that's for the doctor?
Yep.
Right. We're going to be putting out a contract. We'll get applicants to come in from engineering firms that we can work with so we can do an assessment on our schools and equipment. We're doing this in part due to the fact that we're looking at the high school, and we know that we can't do the whole school at once. So we're going to do an assessment so that as we start to replace this equipment, that when we get to the end, when we've completed this project, we don't have mixed, matched equipment. We don't have antiquated equipment that is no longer compatible with where we're going or our control system. So we'll be bringing in engineers for that so that we can put together a program so that as we go in the long term, and you are correct, right now it is a triage situation that we're dealing with. And it's going to be going on for approximately another year that we're going to be under the gun here, just trying to hold it together. And we'll incorporate these assessments, and then we will have a game plan to present, I'm hoping, by next year, to give the council a better idea of what our anticipated goals will be in the long run. But to do that right now would be very difficult, as our time and effort is spent on keeping the buildings operational. I don't know if I answered your question. I know it was
You did, thank
complex.
you. Just to clarify, the RFP that's going out is on just the high school?
No, this will be to bring in I'll tell you this, the first ones we're going to do at the high school, and we're going to be also doing the library. The equipment on the library at this point has also lived its life. It's coming to end of time for that. I believe we'll be able to get through the cooling season, but in order to select the proper equipment, we need to bring in people that are experts in that field with the newest technology. I know that, in my opinion, and what I've done speaking with the engineers that we hope to be using, that we're going to be switching them out from gas-fired units to heat pump electric, which will give us heating and cooling, and will remove that fossil fuel gas units from the roof. And that's exactly what I'd like to do at the high school. So that's, again, why we're not just jumping into this changing equipment out. We want to make sure that as we move this forward, we're going to do it once, and we're going to do it correctly. And we'll save some money. There's a lot of incentives out there, and we really look forward to moving this kind of quickly so that we can take advantage of those large amounts of incentives that are on the market right now. We don't want to be the last ones in.
Sure. So it sounds like when I combine everything you've said at various meetings here, school committee, et cetera, the story that I see taking shape is that this you were tasked with all of the schools, and you did a walkthrough through all of them.
After
Did I hear that right? At a
Yes.
certain point,
Yes, we did. Yeah, we
prior
went
to
through.
today, at a certain
Yes, oh no,
point,
no, absolutely,
yes,
you're correct.
you did a walkthrough of all of the schools. And from there, you looked at what are the worst emergencies that would be either the most dangerous or the most dangerous to not address, or the most serious kind of improvement that would make the biggest difference. So that is kind of a plan, right?
Sure. I think you can see that in the handout. I think
Yeah.
it was the steam piping that in the two schools, we kept the heat running. The schools didn't close down.
Yep.
There were sleepless nights because we came pretty close to having to shut down one of the schools. We did not. We were able to accomplish our goals, and it was able to keep the school building open. And yeah, you are correct. That
Okay.
is where we're at.
So then the next phase of this is to then, once you've handled those emergencies and once you go out to bid for the equipment and you've addressed all of the most serious issues, you're saying about a year from now, you would come back to the council with a more detailed plan about the rest of the school facilities and how and what it might cost to address them, or what a plan might look like to address the rest of the facilities. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
That is accurate. To suggest that we could do that right now, it's all hands on deck, 24/7, and the timing is not right for us at this point. But we're getting to that point now that we'll be reaching out. We'll bring in a firm that we've worked with, hopefully that we've worked with in the past, and that we can start to accumulate the information we need to put together a package, hopefully next year when we're sitting here, to give you a better idea of what we see the future at.
So then my last question, and it kind of circles back to equity or just those other emergencies that take place that may not have a big equipment fix, but certainly impact kids in classrooms, or when we hear about, a particular classroom, this room is 89 degrees and this room is 48 degrees, and how do you address those issues as they come up?
When it becomes a priority or it becomes a situation that the superintendent or the principal would call us directly, not necessarily put a work order in, if there is some way that we can help alleviate those problems, we will do it. We are looking into potentially incorporating out of our Green Communities Fund, doing one of the schools as a test for putting in air conditioning. Putting in some air conditioning and upgrading the heating system. We've just started getting some quotes on equipment. We're looking right now at the Liberty School. They've got a lot going on there this year. They've got the new roof. We're also going to be doing some renovation work to some classrooms that they are beginning using for special needs children, and hopefully we'll be able to fence in a playground area for them as well. And again, another project that if we do in-house, we'll be saving tens of thousands of dollars as well. So we're trying to coordinate it and save money with a limited budget that we have, so that's our goal.
And is there any sort of ongoing list or reporting? So if parents are wondering, when is my school going to come up on this list, or I'm at Ross School, or I'm at this school or that school, and I don't understand why this situation has not been addressed, how do we provide that kind of transparency to families to give them the assurances of when it will or why it isn't?
Certainly. I understand your question. It's an important one. Those are questions that when we meet with the superintendent after we get through this year, this has been just a hit the ground and just keep running as hard as you can. I think that was a great question. I think that we can put together something that will work for us going forward. I would be misleading if I was suggest that I could do it this summer, but I think our work card is really full. We're going to be in the schools. We're going to start in June, the day the schools get out. When we finish one project, we're going to jump into another. So working with the school superintendent, we'll be able to get a better assessment of what the school needs are as far as the items that we're referring to. How can we make it cooler? How can we make it nicer? Again, we've been working in the trenches, in the boiler rooms, underground, in the attics, so we've not been able to really attack. We've done a small amount of classroom work and upgrades, but not what we would have liked to have done. Hopefully, we can put together a schedule and make sure that it works town-wide so that everybody's getting as much as we can give them.
Excellent.
Can I make one point? Excuse me.
Please.
As part of this budget process, Superintendent Lee went to all the principals of all the schools and asked them for their wish list. So everyone was asked. We compiled that list, put it in one master file, and that's something that hopefully we'll address as the year goes on. So if it's something small, maybe we'll knock it off because it's easy. If it's something large, it's going to go on to something as part of a bigger plan. But every principal of every school has been asked, what's your particular wish list for things to get done?
That is a really key piece of information, and I think that's really good for families to know, that the problems that they've probably identified already to their principals or their child's teacher have actually filtered upward and over. And so from there, as you said, the easy things, the quick things can be done, and then the emergency issues. So, and having a schedule, having that available, is that something you think that would happen in the fall, or is that something after a year from now when you come back to us?
That wish list, so I'm a
The
finance
schedule
person.
of
Yeah,
wishes,
so
yeah.
as far as scheduling these things, we got emails. It wasn't something formalized, so Superintendent Lee asked his principals, what's your wish list? And they sent it back in an email, and I just kind of typed it out on a spreadsheet of all the things for each school that needs to be worked on. And Mike and his people are aware of that list, and we're just trying to knock things off as the year goes on. So as far as equity and what we're working on, it isn't necessarily what we think should be worked on. All the principals have been asked what they would like to be worked on.
Sure, and a lot of that has to do with costs. I mean, we would love to do everything that they call up and want done. We try to respond to the emergency situations, number one, obviously. We've had some water coolers that have given out on us. We've gone there, had to pull them off the wall, replace them. They're expensive. So it kind of ties up what small funds we had. I mean, I know that, for instance, at the Flaherty School, they've got an issue with shades in the classroom, and it doesn't sound like a big deal, like, oh, can't you just go in there and do the shades? We'd love to, but it's $1,200 a classroom, and when you start multiplying all the classrooms, and when you get to discuss equity, it better be every teacher get what they want, because if one gets left out, that phone will not stop ringing. So we try the best we can. We are going to be addressing those issues. We've ordered some shades for the school. We're going to do a couple classrooms, see if it's acceptable, and then that's the kind of things that we're dealing with. But it does have a cost associated with it. We save a ton of money on labor because we go in and do it, but the material costs, are rising constantly. So we're trying to balance it and keep people, keep them happy, give them a little bit of whatever we can.
Excellent, okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Madam President, any questions?
Gertie and team. We're honored to have you at the helm of this overwhelming task. I wanted to, I think, partly confirm what I'm looking at for numbers, and again, I have serious concerns when we think about our budget and what we are working with, and the fact that we have almost no margin of error for supplementals in FY24. So if I'm looking at this right, building repairs, budgeted building repairs for the entire town, we have $245,588. For heating and ventilation for the entire town, $150,000. I'm getting central air in a small home. I don't know how $150,000 is going to even cover maintenance for our heating and ventilation. And then, bear with me because I haven't got a chance to sum this up yet, but I'm going to do it on the fly. School asbestos. We talked about asbestos briefly. You touched on it. $50,000 for asbestos management for probably, I don't even know how many of our schools are going to need asbestos remediation, but probably all but South and East. And then school plumbing, I see $50,000, again, for 10 schools. I know you don't have a lot to work with, but like I asked the fire chief, are we basically putting the numbers in to make the numbers work? Because I can't see my way clear to how $245,000 is going to be enough to cover building repairs for the entire town for 12 months.
It's not.
Right. And then $150 for heating and HVAC?
That would be, the numbers you're referring to that you read will be the minimum amount of money we're going to need to maintain the systems operational for the year. Now, what we have done is we've reached out to finance, and we're hoping to submit I believe, potentially a bond to, so we'll have additional funds to do this repair work over the next 5 to 7 years. So that's what we're hoping for in the very short future, near future. I believe it'll be presented to this board. I don't know what the scheduled dates have been set for that, but that's what we've talked about. Realistically, if we came in with the monies that were needed to do all the things we'd like to see done, we would have to take an awful lot of the town budget. And, you know, we have to work within our means, and that's what we've been asked to do. So that's why we have the budget we have today. But we are going to present to this body here a request for potentially floating a bond to cover a lot of these costs going down the road.
Okay, and I appreciate that and understand the constraints we're working on, but I want to illustrate for the residents listening that we can't afford to do what we need to do with what we have. That's the bottom line. And we can borrow, which we're going to have to do, but borrowing also impacts the general budget as well. So that's, and I'll leave that to Ed or Sean to figure out what that is, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves that we can borrow, but that too comes at a cost because you're paying interest. Then the one other thing, or one other question I have, and thank you very much, Mr. McGurty, for clarifying that. I just want to tag on and offer up for maybe for future conversations with the mayor's office in particular, or thoughts between the mayor's office and the school department is, you know, when we think about Councilor Maglio and Councilor Flaherty both talked about equity, and I think we want to think about, we want to make sure that the schools that maybe don't have the most active or robust PTOs are getting just as many window air conditioners, just as many basketball hoops as the schools whose PTOs, for many, many reasons, may have more resources and funding. And so I think that isn't necessarily for the facilities budget, but I wanted to add that level of clarification because that's how I think about it. I know we frequently, and we should, be grateful for donations, but we need to really be thoughtful about how those donations are being taken in and given out, because we need to make sure that all the new stuff is getting spread equally across the entire community.
Yes, Chief of Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I just want to point out to Councilor Maglio's point earlier in your questioning about funding. Tonight, before you, we're talking about general fund operating budget for the town and what other sources are supporting our schools. And so we're excited this summer that the facilities team is going to be also managing projects with 4 elementary school roof replacements. So while we're talking about budget repair lines, those are external to what we're discussing before you this evening, right? So New South Middle School, the investment there is external to what we're talking about this evening, and I'm sure Mr. McGurty could review additional, for example, whether it's fire headquarters or the 2 JFK buildings, so other public buildings that we are making investments in that are being funded external to the general fund operating budget. So just to clarify, as we're talking about that, there is a lot of ancillary work happening that this department is involved in.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have one more question.
Thank you. Madam President.
One more question. Just one other question. When we heard from Blue Hills administration, one thing they mentioned that was I felt really innovative, and I'm wondering if it's something that we're exploring because Braintree pays into Blue Hills, is they use student labor over the summer So I'm just wondering if that's something we've explored. It looks like the Chief of Staff is excited about this question.
No, actually, the schools do have a program where they have summer help. We have it in the Parks and Rec, we have it in the Highway Department, Water and Sewer has it, and Facilities. We'll have a few students coming over and working with us as well.
That's great. I'm happy to hear that, and I think it's good training, too. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you,
President.
Mr. McGurty.
I know Council Flaherty indicated she'd like another question.
Oh, yes, thank you. I have a couple of questions. One is, you've discussed some very major repairs and replacements to the schools that you've been working on recently, and considering the age of these buildings, which all are very old, in your opinion, are the investments worth it? Does it make sense to do them on such old buildings?
That's a great question. Some of the buildings, we haven't made major investments in any building that I do not believe is in the best interest of the town right now in the long run. The major work we did is obviously in our high school, which I know that people don't like the way it looks and they all want a new high school. I walk that building all the time. I went to that I was in that school, I went there. That building is as solid a building as you will ever see. Ugly? It may be. I don't ever recall one time going to school there that I ever said, boy, this is really one beautiful looking building. I'm really happy I'm here. I never thought about it at all personally. I don't know how many students think about it, but it is a well-built building. It is not as attractive as we would like it. It is a school. There's some things we can do. I think that's a place to keep investing. I don't think it's going anywhere tomorrow. We have some issues that we may have to look at in the near future with regards to the Highland School and the Hollis School, the two oldest schools we have. There's an awful lot of work that can be done in those schools, and the question is, we need to really seriously as a town look at it and decide, do we want to keep pumping money into it, or do we need to look at a different course of action for those buildings. We can keep them running, we can keep them operational. Where we go with where we spend our money, it may not be the wisest buildings to keep putting money into. If we take a close look at them and what do we really want to see in these buildings in the future. So we'd have to look at that. But all the major work that we've done has been to either keep the building working on an emergency basis, or the investment itself for the long haul was a wise investment, similar to what we've done over at 74 Pond Street. We did the Council on Aging. We're going to continue to work on the Council on Aging. We've done it here at Town Hall, so we do look at it that way, whether or not our investment is wise.
So I can certainly understand how you're operating on what seems like an emergency basis. It seems like every time you get involved in working to fix something else immediately commands your attention, and you scatter and go deal with that one, and then you try and regroup and complete the work you were working on, and then there's something else. Parents of small children understand its problems. But the triage process that you're using right now, that's just how that has to be. It has to be triaged, and that's because we've let it go for too long. In the long run, though, that is a very reactive way of handling repair, and eventually, one would hope, either by building new buildings like we're doing with South, or getting a handle on some of the older buildings that aren't too old to be able to continue, to stop having emergencies, then it becomes a question of well, where are we going to put our priorities? And because they're schools, and they're very, very public facing and very, very critical, and they perform very, very complicated functions, it's really imperative that they be handled equitably so that you don't have all of the best playground equipment at one school, right? All of the nicest flooring in another school. All of, the best HVAC in, you don't want those inequities to be a part of our students' experience in our town. So one of, because we're in budgeting right now, I think that in our budget we have a whole layout of how town hall is going to be cared for. And I think it would be wise, not this year, but going forward, for the school buildings to be similarly mapped out. I think that way it would add a level of transparency to how these decisions are being made. It would subject them in a deliberate way to public scrutiny, and it would also help underline this really important outcome of budgeting, which is that things happen. When you budget for them, they get taken care of. And we have deferred maintenance on all of our town buildings, and especially our school buildings, for a long time. And that does not work to our advantage. As just a little sidebar, I understand we have facilities dues, right?
We do.
Are you finding that is helpful in guiding your decisions about maintenance at all?
What we've done is we've adopted our own system. We've got an individual right now who handles most of our schoolwork. He's doing the PMs on all our mechanical equipment. He's doing a fantastic job. He's in a cycle where he runs through all the school buildings. We've got the custodians involved, changing filters out into unit ventilators within the classrooms. He handles all the rooftop equipment, and we get assessments from him as to where we need to be. The facilities dude that program would give us the same work order. We'd have to sift through them, and we'd have to separate the ones that are really not important at that time. So we have adopted that particular type of system to go in and do the work in these buildings. And we're doing it now. We're implementing it. And you are correct. We are just triaging right now. We do anticipate to moving into a new phase by the end of the year, a year from now. I can't agree more with you with regards to the schools. It is absolutely imperative that we do all this work and we maintain them equitably and equally throughout the town. We get that feedback from the superintendent. We meet him once a week, and he's giving us feedback from the school committee. We talk to the principals usually daily, and we get their feedback as to their needs of the building. And within the budgeting, we make every effort to meet the goals that they set for us. So at this point, that's what we're doing. Having a plan, as you had suggested, is a great idea. We would look forward to doing that, working hand in hand with the schools and the principals as well, to see where our greatest needs are, and getting the guidance from the school administration is the best way for us to work that particular system.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I don't have any questions for you, whereas I think the thoroughness in the questions that were asked by my fellow counselors here tonight really did a great job in addressing what I had from a concern. I guess the only thing I have left just to add this evening is that it is a significant task before you, significant task of the town. And again, just another example adding to what my concerns are from a building, no pun intended, but building up of our risk position as a town, our financial position as we move forward. So those will be deliberations that I will take into my considerations as we consider further how we'll be voting on this budget. I want to ask if there are any other questions from the councilors on this topic. Okay, you're all set. We appreciate your time, Mr. DeVito. Thank you so much. Chief of Staff. We have one more item of business that we just need to clean up before we go. Should take just a minute with the revolving funds. So, thank you, Mr. McGurty. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I would like to get a motion to take off of the table. Motion 23027. Revolving funds.
Oh, okay, motion to take off the table order 23027.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So what we have here is we have the schools. We have full-day kindergarten revolving fund and a school bus revolving fund. And I just want to ask if there are any questions from any of the counselors this evening on either one of those items. We do not. So, thank you. We appreciate your time and sticking around. My apologies for missing this item while you were here earlier and having to wait.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, you may.
Because I did sit around and had the opportunity to listen to the last presentation, I would just want to say on behalf of the school system that Mike McGordy and his crew have been entirely responsive to all the emergencies that we have had since they came on board. The task, as you have described, is overwhelming, the work non-ending, but whenever we pick up the phone to call them, they arrive, they fix what needs to be fixed so we can continue operations, and that is where we are as a system with respect to facilities, and so we are very grateful for their work, and I just wanted to make that clear.
And I think the town echoes that appreciation.
All right. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Okay. As we spoke about, just to kind of tighten up our expectations for Monday. Yes, you may.
So would you like to vote on the revolving tonight?
I think that may be a thing for us to get off to get out of the way.
Yes, please.
Where we haven't had any questions on any of the other items to date. Do you have that with you?
I do.
Okay. Thank you.
Motion for favorable recommendation to the full council that in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 44, Section 53E12 of the general, is it 1/2 or 1/2? Right, okay. Section 53E1/2 of the general laws, the town of Braintree hereby sets the maximum amount that may be spent during fiscal year 2024, beginning on July 1st, 2024, for the revolving funds established by ordinance for certain departments, boards, committees, agencies, or officers as follows. Revolving fund, Elder Affairs, Services, and Activities, Department, Board, Committee, Agency, or Officer, the Department of Elder Affairs, FY 2024 spending limit $30,000. Fund, Immunization, Department, Board of Health, spending limit, FY 24 spending limit $50,000. Fund, Library Materials, Board, the Library Trustees, FY 2024 spending limit $45,000. Revolving fund, Library Room Rental, Department, Board, Committee, Agency, or Officer, Library Trustees, FY 24 spending limit $5,000. Revolving fund, Recycling Materials, Department, Board, Committee, Agency, or Officer, Mayor, in conjunction with Recycling Coordinator, FY 2024 spending limit $4,800. Revolving fund, Household Hazardous Waste, Department, Board, Committee, Agency, or Officer, Mayor, in conjunction with Recycling Coordinator, $50,000 is the FY 2024 spending limit. Revolving fund, full-day kindergarten, Department, Board, Committee, Agency, or Officer, School Committee, FY 2024 spending limit $1,100,000. Revolving fund, Pro Shop, Department, Board, Committee, Agency, or Officer, Mayor, in conjunction with Director of Golf Operations, FY 2024 spending limit $250,000. Revolving fund, Food and Beverage, Department, Board, Committee, Agency, or Officer, Mayor, in conjunction with Director of Golf Operations, FY 2024 spending limit $500,000. Revolving fund, School Bus, Department, Board, Committee, Agency, or Officer, School Committee, FY 2024 spending limit $500,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that is unanimous. Thank you. We appreciate that. So just to tighten up, again, expectations for Monday evening, we are going to have a callback with regarding the revenues. and Finance. So, at this point, what is contingent is we will be getting some updated information via the email on this, as it pertains to the schools, and we can address that on Monday evening based on what questions that have been submitted and the answers that have been received. Additionally, on that agenda, I do believe we have the supplemental number 2?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Are there any questions from the council members, committee members? Okay. Are we all set? Chief of Staff LaForest?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. And we want to thank you. Thank you, Director Spellman. And thank you, Mr. McGoldrick. And I want to thank Jerry and Mr. Needham for their patience with us and sticking through these long nights. So with that, do we have a motion for, oh, excuse me, we don't have to put anything on the table.
I'm sorry, just the 23025.
Right, okay.
Motion to table order 23025 to May 22nd, 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, everybody.